They went into battle with pride, courage, and steel, but within minutes, Italian crews realized the terrifying truth. Their tanks weren't just outgunned, they were obsolete. This is the story of how bravery met the unstoppable force of American firepower. October 23rd, 1942. The first rays of dawn broke over the endless Egyptian desert, painting the dunes near El Alamein in pale gold. Inside the suffocating steel hulls of their Caro Armato M13 over 40 tanks, crews of the Ariete Armored Division performed their morning rituals in silence. The air reeked of oil, diesel, and fear. Each man checked his ammunition, 104 rounds for the 47mm main gun, 4 Breda machine guns loaded and ready. Outside, engines coughed to life one after another until the desert trembled with the growl of 278 Italian tanks. It was to be the largest armored engagement Italy had ever fought in North Africa. None of these men could have imagined that within hours, they would come face to face with something that would forever shatter their illusions. The Americans had arrived not in person, but in steel and smoke, and their tanks would make the proud M13 over 40 look like relics from another age. What followed was not just a military defeat, it was an awakening, a brutal revelation that would strip away years of propaganda and expose the raw truth of industrial war. But the seeds of that revelation had been sown years before, in quiet offices and workshops far from the desert. In 1937, deep in the design rooms of Fiat Ansaldo, Italian engineers labored over blueprints for a new weapon that promised to carry the Royal Army into the modern era. Their task: build a medium tank to replace the flimsy L3 Tankets and the flawed Mlevin over 39. The result was christened the Caro Armato M13 over 40, named for its projected weight of 13 tons, and the year it was meant to enter service, 1940. On paper, it looked formidable, a 47mm gun in a fully rotating turret, finally freeing the gunner from the crippling fixed mount of earlier models. Armor up to 42mm thick on the turret front. 4 men inside: driver, machine gunner, commander, gunner, and loader. A diesel engine, the Fiat, 125 horsepower, 8 tons, giving it a modest 32 kilometers per hour on level ground, but impressive range for desert warfare. It was Italy's proud declaration that it could fight a modern mechanized war. Factories across Italy roared into production. Ansaldo built the hulls, Fiat supplied the engines, Breda delivered the guns. By December 1940, 60 to 70 tanks rolled off the line each month. Over 700 M1342s would be produced before the model gave way to its successor, the M14 over 41. In total, more than 3,000 tanks based on the same chassis would serve as Italy's armored backbone throughout the war. To the men who would drive them, the M13 over 40 felt like progress. Its gun could pierce British cruiser tanks. Its armor, they were told, could shrug off the British 2-pounder shells. They had been given Italy's finest war machine, proof, they believed, that Mussolini's promise of industrial rebirth was real. But war, as they would soon discover, is not measured in promises, it is a race, and Italy had fallen behind before the race even began. The first M13, 42nd shipped to North Africa in late 1940, joining the newly formed Babini Brigade. The crews, young, undertrained, and proud, had just 25 days of instruction before deployment. Many had never even fired their main gun in training. They went to war with barely enough fuel and ammunition to sustain a single offensive. And radios? Most tanks didn't have them. Commanders resorted to hand signals or jumped out of their hatches under fire to shout orders. In an era where coordination decided victory, silence was fatal. Their baptism by fire came at Bardia in early January 1941. The British and Australian forces attacked with artillery and air support that darkened the sky. The Italian tanks fought bravely but blindly. Without radios or experience, they couldn't coordinate or regroup. Tanks were hit and abandoned before they could return fire. 3 days later, it was over. The Australians suffered fewer than 500 casualties. The Italians lost 40,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. Entire battalions disappeared. Survivors remembered confusion more than fear. No orders, no communications, only explosions and screams. Yet, in those same deserts, the M13 over 40 was not entirely without merit. In early 1941, its 47mm gun was capable of punching through British armor. Its defenses, though modest, could withstand lighter weapons. The true weakness lay not in the steel, but in the men behind it, rushed, undertrained, and undersupplied. Italy's armored doctrine remained outdated, drawn from the slow wars of the 1,930 rather than the lightning strikes of modern mechanized combat. Recovery vehicles? Virtually none. Damaged tanks were abandoned and later claimed by the British. Maintenance teams were overwhelmed. Spare parts were scarce. The desert itself became an enemy. Sand choked the engines, heat warped the metal, and supply lines stretched across 1,000 miles of hostile terrain. By the time Rommel's Afrika Corps arrived in 1941, Italy's tank force was bloodied but wiser. Training centers opened back home, crews drilled relentlessly, radios became standard, coordination improved, and when the Ariete Division faced the British at Bir el Gubi on the 19th of November, 1941, they were no longer the confused men of Bardia. Under the blazing sun, the Italian M13 40-seconds maneuvered across the open desert, trading blows with British crusaders armed with 40mm 2-pounder guns. Both sides suffered heavy losses. When the dust settled, the British withdrew, leaving dozens of burning crusaders behind. For the first time, the Italian tankers had held their ground. That day, they fought not as victims of bad design, but as soldiers who understood their machines, who used terrain, patience, and courage to match their enemy shot for shot. It was proof that skill could sometimes bridge the gap where technology failed. Yet, even as they adapted, the war moved forward without them. New British and American tanks entered the desert machines with thicker armor, bigger guns, and engines that could run for days without faltering. By 1942, Italy's M13 40-seconds were fighting a battle of obsolescence. They were still proud, but already ghosts of a vanished era. And in the months ahead, those ghosts would meet their executioners, the American-built Shermans. As the smoke of battle faded across the Italian fields, silence replaced the roar of engines and the clash of steel. The tanks lay rusting under a gray sky, relics of men who once believed that courage and honor could conquer fate. But war, as always, betrayed them. It tore apart not only bodies, but ideals. The Italian tankers were not faceless soldiers. They dreamed of victory, of serving their homeland, of being remembered as heroes. Yet war is never a canvas for dreams. It is a furnace that consumes them. When the American Shermans rolled through their lines, the survivors understood a cruel truth. They hadn't just lost a battle, they had lost faith. They learned that bravery without purpose becomes mere recklessness, and honor, when misplaced, turns into a chain that binds men to illusions. Years later, bullet holes still scarred the village walls where they fought. Children played near the wrecks of burned-out tanks, unaware that those metal skeletons had once carried the hopes of hundreds. History remembers numbers, not names. It records victories and defeats, not the final thoughts of a young soldier dying alone in the mud, a boy of 20 who no longer thought of honor, only of home. Some officers wrote in their diaries before the battle, "I do not fear death, I fear dying for nothing." They were taught that dying for honor was the highest virtue. But as the world around them collapsed, they saw that honor cannot shield a man from truth, nor rebuild a homeland turned to ashes. Their courage remained, but it was the courage of men awakening from a dream. No one truly wins a war. The victors merely lose less. Yet in defeat, the Italians discovered something the victors could not, the clarity that comes when illusions die. They realized that strength is not found in steel or slogans, but in the quiet act of accepting one's own humanity amid chaos. Photographs from those days show hollow faces and empty eyes. They are not the eyes of soldiers, but of men who have seen the limits of pride. Some became prisoners, others vanished into history, and a few returned home, carrying invisible scars heavier than any wound. Their silence spoke louder than any anthem. War equalizes all men. The bullet does not care about flags or nations. Beneath the helmets, every soldier shares the same fear, the same longing to survive. And when the guns fall silent, what remains is not victory, but silence itself. A silence that whispers the same truth through every generation. That honor is meaningless without compassion, and courage without conscience leads only to ruin. Italy rebuilt itself after the war, not with glory, but with grief. The once proud tanks became museum pieces, cold and lifeless reminders of youth consumed by ideology. Tourists look at them now without hearing the echoes, the shouts, the prayers, the unspoken regrets. Historians may describe strategies and tactics, but the real history of war is written in the pauses between explosions and the heartbeat of a man who suddenly understands he is fighting for nothing. That heartbeat is universal. It belongs to the Italian tanker, the American gunner, the German infantryman. It is the moment when humanity briefly pierces through the madness. One historian wrote, "Empires die twice, once on the battlefield and once in memory." The soldiers who fell in Italy died both deaths. Yet their stories endure, reminding us that the pursuit of honor often leads men away from the very humanity they seek to defend. Today, when we look at their faces in faded photographs, we no longer see enemies. We see people young, uncertain, fragile, who believed in something that could not survive contact with reality. And perhaps that is how we truly learn from history, not through glory, but through empathy. War remains the mirror of mankind. It reflects our cruelty, but also our capacity for reflection, regret, and mercy. The Italian tankers entered it with dreams and left it with silence. But within that silence lies the deepest truth that even in failure, the faint spark of humanity endures. And when the film fades to black, we need not remember who won or lost. Only that somewhere, under the soil of Italy, men still lie where they fell, not as heroes, not as villains, but as human beings who once believed that honor could save the world. Perhaps in that tragic belief, they saved something far greater, the memory of what it means to be human.